Hey, everybody, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on growing the community. I'm your host, Mike, and with me, as always, is Evan.
Special Evan.
Yes, you are, sir. Indeed, special. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to continue our series where we're going through ramping up new players to the rules, kind of go through a beginner guide. Again, also for veteran players too. You'd be surprised how many of us veterans out there, myself included, it's hard to remember all the rules. There's a whole bunch of them, and it's great to get some different perspective. Or again, you might read through it the first time, might not have memorized it, or you're
Yeah.
playing a game and somebody's kind of going through it real fast. Kind of hard to remember it all. So we're going to do a deep dive here, and we're going to go through the special rules.
Yeah, and it's not just about the special rules individually. Every unit that generally has special rules has many of them. So it's about the
Oh yeah.
interactions between and combinations of special rules you can use together. And some of the rules specify this out and say how they're supposed to work, and other times you just have to learn it. And you're like, wow, that's how it works, and yeah, that's how it works. So we're going to talk
Mhm.
about those kind of interactions and also some of the kind of units that have those kind of special rules when we get there. So, this section at the beginning, it's just saying, hey, these are universal special rules. There's kind of a tier list of rules. Special rules will override the core rules, so they can tell you
Mhm.
something that if the regular book says one way, this overrules that. Then army special rules overrule that system, right? And then unique special rules overrule that on top of that. So there's kind of this like tier list of uniqueness, and it seems kind of obvious
So
when you actually play it.
let's slow down for people who aren't familiar with these systems. Okay,
Yeah,
so this is saying the people who wrote this book are saying we are going to contradict ourselves. They're going to have things that disagree. That is intentionally, they're saying this is how this rule system is written. To be fair, this is not specific to Old World. There are many other game systems out there. This is a very common system where you have the basic rules and it says these are always the way you play the game unless there's an exception, right?
yeah,
And that's effectively what this is. But the great thing that they added in this edition that they were not clear about in other editions was having that tier ranking system, which I think is a fantastic inclusion. And I know it might seem a little overwhelming at first, but honestly, you'll figure it out real quick. It's like you read the core rule book, boom, that's how everybody works by default. Play 3, 4, 5 games, you'll have that picked up, no problem. You'll get it down. And then it's like, by the way, if the next layer, the more often you're going to see special rules is typically on unit entries. That's where you see them all over the place.
yeah.
Even the most common troops in the game often have several special rules on their unit entry. It's pretty common. Some of the really advanced units could have 5, 6, plus rules depending on the unit. Some of them get really crazy, and it's really exciting because, as Evan said, it's not about what does the individual rule do. It's when you start combining them together that they
Yeah.
get really spicy and really, really cool. So it's saying here's the base rules of the game. Almost every unit in the game is going to have some form of special rules that allow it to break the core rules. Go, saying I get to do this that the core rule says I don't get to do. Really fun and exciting. Then there are other rules. There are army special rules, and it's saying, hey, if the army special rule, right, if there's a contradiction between that and a universal special rule, the army special rule wins when they contradict each other, which does happen. And then the last one, of course, is the unique special rules. And so there are some unique things in the game. Honestly, there's really not that many unique special rules in the game. The vast majority of special rules are the universal ones. That is by far where you see just tons and tons and tons of them. And then most every army, I think, except Empire, really has army special rules. But again, they only have a few, right? It's typically that one pager in the book or
Yeah.
at the end of the codex where it says, this is what the vampire counts do. This is what the chaos warriors do. This is what this do. Unfortunately, Empire doesn't have that page, but every other army typically has that one page and it's saying, so that's really what we're talking about with this ranking system. So
Yeah.
keep that in mind as you're reading through it if you're not familiar with it. Once you have that understanding down, it works pretty well.
Okay, then the next section is talking about cumulative special rules. So this confuses people, I think, a little bit first. What it's saying is that unless if there's basically any other way that is specified, like in for example in the frequently asked questions section, the special rules will stack with each other. So if your character has Armor Bane 1 and you have the Razor Standard equipped to the same unit, they can add together and become Armor Bane 3, because that Razor Standard gives you Armor Bane 2, and then those add together. Um,
Hmm.
there are rules that don't stack in this way. You can't get Frenzy twice to get 2 extra attacks. That's not a thing. Or, for example, you can't have Stubborn twice, so you could use Stubborn more than once. So there are kind of state effects where you just have something or you don't. And then there's kind of these rules that have these stat next to them, like Armored Hide, for example, also has a number. It can stack with other armor and other Armored Hide sources.
Yeah, and you'll have to check the FAQ for specifics. They did update some of those, but generally speaking, if you see that bracket with a number next to it, more often than not, that will stack with the same other things that give that same bracket. But again, read the rules. And don't just read the rules. Read that fine print on some of the rules. Often, where it looks like, oh, that's a fluff sentence, right? That's that weird cursive sentence at the bottom. It's not. It's not a fluff sentence. It looks like it's a fluff sentence more often. Sometimes they are, but more often than not, there are important caveats and statements in that cursive text at the bottom. So read all of the rules and then check the FAQ.
All right, so we're going to go through the special rules and talk about kind of some of the things that they do and how they work. So first off, we have ambushers. This is a special rule that allows the unit that has it, if they want to instead of deploying at the start of the game, they instead can stay in reserve as ambushers. And then at the start of each turn, after your first turn, so basically on the second turn onwards, you roll a d6, and on a 4 plus, the unit arrives on that turn. And you have to arrive the turn you roll it. So if you roll a 1, 2, or 3, you don't show up. And if you roll a 4, 5, or 6, you have to show up. You can't just be like, no, I'd rather show up later. You have to show up then. However, this throws people off a lot. You roll it at the start of your turn, but they don't actually get put on the table till your compulsory moves phase. And this is actually important because it means that you can't charge the turn you show up from an ambush, for example. You also can't have like enchantments cast on you because you show up after that phase is already finished. So it's really hard for people to remember at first. If they're going to roll it at the start of the turn, they're like, well, then I'll put them on. But no, you don't do that yet, actually. And then the other requirement is that they have to be touching the battlefield edge on some battlefield edge somewhere, and they can't be within 8 inches of any enemy unit. So it is possible for your opponent to, if they know you have an ambusher unit, start putting like some of their little units 8 inches from the edge of the table in different places to keep you from coming out behind them, right? That's something that you can do. It's called screening.
Yeah, they're going to want to zone you out. Other things that people commonly get wrong with this is the first sentence. You may put yourself into ambush. That means that you don't have to. So at the beginning of each game, you can choose, oh, I'm playing an opponent where I do want to try and use my ambush roll, or, oh, he's got me zoned out, or he's got so many units, or there's no good ambush targets. I'd rather be on my front line and deploy normally. So you have a choice for whether you choose to ambush or not. But the roll, you don't have a choice there. If you roll whatever the die result is, you are coming in or you are not. The dice gods will determine that. You don't have a choice once the die has been cast.
So there is different special characters that can give you a +1 or -1 in this roll to help make them either show up if they didn't, or not show up if you don't want them to yet. Or the Beastmen have the Bray horn, where they can then sound that horn to get another reroll on it. But you have to take a Beast Lord as your general if you're going to do that. But so there are ways to manipulate ambushers, and that's something interesting to think about. However, the thing about ambush is that you're not on the table on turn 1, and then if you show up on turn 2, which is kind of the best case scenario a lot of the time, you still can't charge turn 2. So if you're a melee unit and you ambush, you're not going to get into combat until turn 3 at the bare minimum, no matter what, right?
Yeah.
So that is a limitation with this rule, that if all you want to do is fight people all day and you're fast, then ambushing might not be the right move then, right? My favorite ambush unit is the Senegor, because they get to show up and do their little open order pivot turn after they show up, because they can't march, but they can do the pivot. And then they can throw their axes, and then at the next turn they're like, great, I'm going to charge whatever's right in front of me, right? It's great. And they have enough movement to actually catch up to them. So I like them for that.
Now, not a lot of units have the ambusher special rule. It is one of the more rare ones. Some armies have almost none. The Beastman army has a ton of them. But again, depending on what events you're going to, it is common at our events that, we typically have one of the scenarios will allow additional units to ambush, right? So that is a common thing you might run into at different TOs with different events where even though the unit doesn't typically come with ambush, they might have, hey, this scenario, we're going to let another unit or two that you select, typically with limitations, to ambush. So typically very few units have it. Unless you're Beastman, a lot of units have it. Otherwise, you might be going to an event that allows more ambushers, which can be really fun.
Yeah, the other thing you can do with ambush is you can just take a unit you don't want the other person to kill and be like, all right, they're going to ambush, because now it's going to take forever for them to show up. Maybe they don't even have enough time to go and get them once they show up. So if you just want them not to die, you're like, cool, they're in ambush.
Yep. Or hope you don't roll the dice, the result you don't want. All right, moving on.
Armor Bane. So Armor Bane is essentially a kind of a halfway measure between having armor piercing, which just removes armor from the other person's roll, and not, because in order to get the armor piercing on that specific wound, you have to roll a 6 to wound. So this means that only some of the time do you actually get the AP, and other times you don't, which means you have to start separating out your dice. Like if I roll a bunch of longbow shots at a group of knights, I'll have a couple that roll 6s to wound and say, okay, these ones are AP 1, and then I've got 3 that are AP 0 because they're the ones that didn't roll 6s. And you're kind of constantly telling your opponent the different numbers of the each dice that either did or didn't roll the 6s because of this roll. So it does
Hmm.
complicate matters a little bit because you're saying, okay, 2 are at -1, and then there's 3 that are at -0. And the other person's like, what did you say?
Yeah. So you just got to slow down a bit, but again, you'll get it real quick. But this is
Yeah.
where you need to separate your dice pool and such. And it's usually really good to clump the dice together where you go, okay, these 2 over here are at minus this, and then this 1 or 2 over here are at minus that. And then you just roll them one at a time. Make sure you're communicating with your opponent is really clear. And now, this is a type of mechanic that is in a lot of the other GW games. I think the biggest difference between 40K or AOS that have a lot of these 6s spike, right? That's what they typically mean when someone says it's going to spike. It means something really exciting happens, like you rolled a crit, you roll a 6 because it's a D6 system. You don't roll nearly as many dice in Old World as those other games, and you don't re-roll all your wounds in Old World like you do in those other games. So in the other games, you can get tons of those spikes to occur more consistently because of the sheer volume of dice you're rolling and the re-rolls. But in Old World, you really don't. So when you spike on 6 and you roll some 6s, it's really powerful. But it's also because you're rolling so few dice, it's not reliable.
No. Yeah. So this is just kind of a nice to have. It tends to be on units that used to have more AP, but now they don't anymore.
Hmm.
For example, like a crossbow is armor bane 2. So it's like if you roll a 6, you get -2 to the armor, but if you don't roll a 6 to wound, you get nothing. So there's just like full armor save.
Big delta.
The other thing that's fun about armor bane is that if you have to roll a 6 plus to wound anyway, then it's you just get it then. So if you rolled the 6, you get it, right?
Hmm.
So if you're using strength 3 bows against some toughness 6 monster, then armor bane is the same as AP. It wouldn't matter at that point.
Yeah.
It's any
So armor
6.
bane is nice to have, but just flat AP on the weapon, even if it's less, is the vast majority of the time better because it's consistent and you know
On
you're going to
average,
get
it's
it.
roughly 3 times as good. So armor bane
Hmm.
3 and AP 1 are roughly equal, because
Yep.
that's just it. Like if you had like a 4 plus to wound, then where are you at with that, right? So, but again,
Hmm.
like I said, it does depend on what's the strength of the attack versus the kind of target you're shooting at, whether that's really going to be a difference.
Yep.
Okay, so then we have armored hide. So armored hide is weird, and again, this is going to confuse people because it says, "Hey, look, gnarled, scaly skin." Scaly skin is a different role. Scaly skin is a
Yeah.
role where things count as having armor instead of having armored hide. And
Yeah.
there's lots of reasons for that. But basically, armored hide is where you just add extra points to your armor save on top of whatever
Hmm.
your regular armor is. So it's amazing because, if you are, for example, a wood elf and you can only ever wear light armor, you can then have light armor, have a shield, and ride a great stag for armored hide 2, which then becomes a 3 plus armor save. Whereas if the
Hmm.
great stag had scaly skin 5 plus, that would suck, right?
Yeah, it's not the same. So armor height is a fantastic rule because it stacks with your armor save. There are very few things that do, but armor height, again, there's not a lot of this in the game. So units that do have it, you're typically going like, oh, this has armor height. What other combos can I put on this character or unit in order to give them even more armor? Because that's already a very powerful rule when it happens. So that's typically what you're looking for. Like, oh, okay, this unit has armor height. So what base armor can I give them? Can I give them a shield? Can I give them magic armor? Can I get my save to a 3-up or a 2-up? Is typically what you're looking for if a unit does have this available, which is not that common.
Right. Okay, next are breath weapons. So this one's fun because, first of all, you get to use a template. And I love using templates. You get to place your breath weapon with your kind of the broad end over the target and the narrow end in the front arc of like the monster or the thing that's using it. For example, a steam tank has something that's very similar to this.
Hmm.
But a dragon obviously is kind of the main thing we think about. The special rules of this is going to be the specific strength and armor piercing of that monster. Like, for example, the black dragon has the best breath weapon in the game. It's strength 4 and ignores all armor saves, which is great. Whereas the
That's
high
so
elf
good.
dragon is strength 4 AP 1 instead, which is different.
Hmm.
Now, this is weird because, first of all, you can't use it when you march. And because this template is about 8.5 inches long, any monster that can fly 10 generally can charge farther than they can breathe fire on anybody. So there's very rarely a case where you want to breathe fire on people. I
Hmm.
had one happen in my last tournament where instead of charging in and chasing down a group of 40 goblins, it was actually better for me, victory points wise, to turn around the dragon and breathe fire on a group of 9 goblins so that I could very much hope to kill 5 of them and remove their ability to score the objective. And I did that, and
Yeah.
I killed exactly 5 of them, and it was great.
That's exactly right. So that's one of those rare instances where because you had to turn around,
Yeah,
it wasn't a valid charge target. So
yeah.
because you couldn't charge it, the breath weapon was better than default. But that's exactly why it doesn't come into play very often. Most of the breath templates in the game are on monsters. Makes sense. Breathe fire, big monster. Not all of them, but most of them. And because you can't use it when you march, effectively it means exactly right. If you're not marching, or if they are within march distance, you're probably charging anyway. And for the most part, you almost always want to charge something because, again, if you're something that has a flame template, you're probably a big monster. If you're a big monster, you probably want to be charging. And you can't use this while engaged in combat. In previous editions, you could use it while you were in combat. In this edition, you can't, which is why we don't see it that often, which makes me super sad because I love the flame templates. I think they're super cool. I wish they would bring back the either allow you to use it when you march or allow you to use it in combat. But that's not the way the edition is right now. We'll see what they do in the future because I think we just don't see the mechanic used often enough. I would like to see the mechanic happen more often.
Also, just if there are multiple units of infantry that you can all hit with this, it can kill a lot of people. Like
Hmm.
I with my high elf dragon, I rallied. So if you rally in the turn you rally, you can't charge. So I rallied my dragon, and he was sitting right next to like 3 groups of 20 clan rats in my tournament
Oh,
in
wow.
April, and I just was like, okay, what if I just stay here and breathe fire on them? And I think I killed like 16 of them because I hit 3 different units. Yeah, because it's strength
That's
4,
amazing.
AP 1, so they get no armor save. It wins them on 3 pluses, and
Yeah.
I think I got like 25
Yeah.
hits across multiple units because it just kept going. You know,
Hmm.
it's great.
But you still, let's clarify, you still need the partial hits on a 4-up with the
Yeah,
flame template, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
but
So
if you're hitting
again,
multiple units, you start getting a lot of partial hits. It's
it is a
crazy.
big template. So right,
Yeah,
it is technically in terms of actual size. If you're positioned correctly, it has the potential to hit a ton of models.
right.
So again, really cool, love it. I wish they would tweak the mechanic and maybe the next edition of the game. So hopefully we'll see it happen more often.
Yeah, you also can't use it to stand and shoot. One of the reasons for that is because what if they charge from further than you're 9 inches away? When would you use it or not? So obviously they just say you just can't do that. Um, so it's a bit of a bummer. Okay, so chariot runners is a super fun rule. So, but it is very awkward to figure out. What it means is that chariots can draw a line of sight over or through models that have this rule, and they're in a skirmish formation, and you can just charge through them and move through them as if they aren't even there. So what
Hmm.
this means is that you can take your unit of Ungors, for example, that are Ungor archers, for example, and you have them in a little skirmish line, and you can have your little Tuskor chariots behind the Ungors going, I'll just charge if you get close enough, and then I'll
Hmm.
just shoot through the Ungors. If you charge my Ungors, they can just flee, either bounce through or get run down. Who cares? But then, no matter what, like the chariots have that option, and we've got something screening us. The only kind of limitation with setting this all up is that usually the chariots are faster than something like the group of Ungors. So it's like, okay, you got to wait for the Ungors to then walk out in the open while the chariots are slowly falling behind them to kind of set this up. Um,
Hmm.
so recently, I used this at the last tournament with my Shadow Warriors, who can buy chariot runners for 1 point each. They become
Oh, cool.
17 points each, but they're one of my favorite units.
Mm.
They're so
They are a
cool.
really good unit, though. Yeah.
They're like a bunch of Navy SEALs I brought to the table. They're like, we do all this cool
Hmm.
shit.
Yep.
And then
As long as they don't get hit, they're amazing. If
well,
so,
they have evasive,
unfortunately,
so
that does help. Yeah.
they're also weapon skill 5, and they can reroll ones to hit with their swords. So
Yeah. I don't think that helped them versus the Fanatics, did it?
Um, no, but I think that was actually like a misplay because I overran with my chariot, and then it left. I left an option open for the Fennec to just bounce through a chariot and then into the Shadow Warrior. So I kind of just
Yeah.
messed
Fair
up,
enough.
if that makes sense.
Anyway, we're getting on a tangent. I apologize. Cherry Runners is really cool. You just need a little practice with it. Again, not a ton of armies have it, but armies, chariots are super fun. They're super thematic. They're very much an old world thing. I love seeing them on the table. And if you can get some, you could do some really cool combos with Chariot Runners.
But there's only 3
Again, the
factions that
big
can do this. It's just Tomb Kings, Beastmen, and High Elves, I
is
think.
Dark Elves don't have a Cherry Runner
No,
unit.
no, they don't.
No, the Chaos does not. Chaos Warriors. Yeah, you might be right. So
Yeah,
again, not a common rule.
very, very. So, for example, for the skeletons, the big problem with chariot runners with skeletons is the skeletons can't flee. So, if the skeletons get charged, because they're sitting in front of your chariots, then they kill all the skeletons and they overrun into the chariot. So it's like, why did I do
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely not an undead rule, and I think to your point, like, and not every army even has chariots anyway. So yeah, it's just not that common. All right,
That is part
this
of
next
a
one
bit of a
is
pet
the
peeve.
most common rule.
I'm gonna continue the tangent, Mike. I'm continuing the tangent.
Oh, okay, we're
The
back to the
Bronze
tangent. Okay.
Age army that the Tomb
Oh,
Kings are based off of doesn't work
okay.
amazingly with the idea that they're undead who can't run away from stuff, because that's kind of what a Bronze Age army would do. They would they would flee and skirmish and get back in the battle and like charge through each other after
I
they ran
could be
away.
wrong. I don't recall too many actual undead armies during the Bronze Age, but maybe I'm remembering my history wrong.
Remember, you were there.
Oh, ouch,
Yeah,
ouch.
zinger. All right, so close
Woo.
order. Close order is kind of like the default formation, and the only reason it's here as a rule is so that if you adopt a close order formation as opposed to another kind of formation like open order or a skirmish or lance formation, right? So if you don't have this rule, you can't adopt a close order formation. So like for example, white lions don't have this rule, so they can't use a close order formation and they can't get the +1 combat resolution from doing so.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing to keep in mind. Close order. Again, you have to go read the rules on the other page, but effectively, it is the default formation for everybody, and it gives you that +1 combat resolution. Now, if everybody has it, it doesn't matter. But as Evan pointed out, if you're in skirmish, if you're in open, if you're in a different formation, you don't have that +1.
Yeah,
So that's the biggest difference there. And that, let me tell you, sometimes you win or lose a combat by 1 combat resolution point. So it absolutely does matter, and
that is
especially
very
because the
common.
close order can stack. You can have multiple close orders. So again, if you're charging something in your combat with 1, 2, 3 units of close order, suddenly you have a +3 to your combat resolution. So it's a big deal. It might not seem like it. It's one of it is the most common universe special rules, but it matters a whole bunch when you're calculating combat resolution.
All right, so then we have countercharge. So countercharge is a different kind of charge reaction where if a unit that has countercharge is charged by an enemy unit who is basically not infantry, so if they're cavalry, chariot, monster. So cavalry includes war beasts. Chariot is all different kinds of chariots, even like a steam tank, for example. And monster
Hmm.
includes behemoth and regular monsters. So if any of that stuff charges you in your front arc, you can use a countercharge as a reaction, which is where before
So
they
cool.
move, you get to move d3 +1 inches towards them and get to count as charging for the purposes of initiative and having like lances or impact hits or furious charge. All of those things trigger off of countercharge as long as they have to be outside their movement value. So if they're movement 8 and you're 10 inches away, you're good. But if you're 4 inches away, you can't countercharge.
Yeah, I love this rule. Not because it's just cool mechanically, because again, right? Oh, well, they typically who's charging gets that plus up to 3. Typically, sometimes it could be 4 for something like. But if they're in your front, they can get that +3 to their initiative, so they're almost always going to hit you first. But this allows, well, I get +3 to my initiative too, as long as I go that 3 inches, and suddenly you don't have that initiative bonus, and it's just so thematic for me. This feels so old world of those big typically you see this on cavalry units almost primarily. You can see it on some other exceptions, but just seeing these 2 big cavalry units of one's charging in, the other one starts charging back, and they slam together in the middle. It's just so cool and so special. So this is one of the newer ones to this edition of the game, and I think it's a fantastic addition. It's both mechanically great and thematically super fun.
Yeah, it does mean that you have a lot of difficulty stopping things like Blood Knights or Pegasus Knights from being able to just really stomp you. Because if they
Hmm.
countercharge you, then they get their lances, they get a decent initiative bonus. They might even go swing before you. If you're like let's say you're a bunch of great weapon infantry, well, obviously then they can't countercharge you, and that's one of the best things about infantry is that you can't be countercharged. Like that's unironically an amazing rule because if you're a like an ogre hunter on foot, then I'm like, ooh, cool, peg knights. I charge them. They're like, oh, because normally Pegasus Knight players are thinking, oh, I'm just going to countercharge anything in the universe that tries to hurt me, and I will just hurt it more. Well, not if it's an
Hmm.
infantry model. Then you can't. And it's actually surprising
Hmm.
when this happens to them, and they don't know what to do. They're confused. Their brain goes, I don't know. Um, I have another famous time that I think about all the time where my shades with additional hand weapon charged in, and like six of them, and they were just like, aha, and they just chopped up a bunch of peg knights who didn't get to countercharge me, and it was great.
Hmm.
All right, so cumbersome and ponderous are two rules that are incredibly easy to mix up because a lot of weapons have both. But cumbersome is just it can't be used for stand and shoot. Now, this is very often on things like a bolt thrower or a cannon or a grape shot and things of that nature. Things that are like too ridiculous to try to figure out what they would do as a stand and shoot reaction.
Hmm.
Even though I wish bolt throwers could stand and shoot, that'd be awesome. That'd be so
Yeah.
cool.
Well, I mean, maybe they could always add one in the future, but yeah, exactly. This is so there are special rules like this one that they're just penalties. There's no benefit to this. This is a penalty. And again, this is to get that again, it's not just balance, but also immersion factor as well, right? In terms of, and that's what they're going for here of nope, this particular weapon does not make sense that if someone's charging you, you could just rapidly respond and shoot at them. So when units have this, again, war machines or heavier guns are typically where you're going to see this. So this is a straight penalty, but again, this is good. So pay attention to these. And again, your first probably dozen, maybe more games, the area of the book you're going to be looking up the most is your special rules until you have them
Yeah,
memorized.
yeah. It also means you can't shoot twice in the same round. So, for example, if I've got a bunch of pistoliers, I can run forward on my turn, fire pistols at people. They can be
Mhm.
charged by the enemy on their turn, and I can stand, or I can fire and flee and shoot at them on my turn. And if I don't get killed, then I can rally and shoot them again. So I can start shooting twice in the same round, up to 12 times in the whole game. But a cumbersome definitely can't. Does that make sense? So it's kind
Mhm.
of it's an indication that they have like a longer reload time, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yep. Good thematic.
Detachment. Well, the special rule detachment just says it can be fielded as a detachment. So I feel like we'll have to go over the formations and how you field units at a different time because this isn't
Yeah.
really a rule. It's more like you have the option to be used as a detachment, and what that means is something totally different, right? So the special rule detachment means you can be a detachment as an option. However, in order to be a detachment, you have to have a parent unit. So you have to have one that's
Mhm.
a regimental unit, and you have to have one that's a detachment, and this gets really confusing because it used to be more
Yep.
interchangeable than it is now.
I think the biggest difference, and again, we'll cover this in a different episode, is this used to be something that was fairly exclusive to Empire. And now in this edition of the game, they've opened up detachments to be something that pretty much any army can do. But again, we'll cover that in a separate video when we focus on that. I think that's the biggest difference between previous editions and this edition is they wanted this to become more universal special rule rather than an Empire only rule.
So dragged along lets you. So dragged along is used on three models in the game. There's the Plague Furnace of the Skaven. There's the
Hmm.
Screaming Bell of the Skaven, and then there's
Hmm.
the Cauldron of Blood of the Dark Elves. And so it's a
Hmm.
legacy rule. It's the only thing it matters for. Um, what it does is it's trying to replace the idea that you would put these things in units by saying just use whatever infantry unit is nearby's movement value instead of its movement of like two.
Hmm.
It's lame.
Yep. Clearly, well, again, clearly this is one of those ones, and we did address this. You can go check out our legacy errata where we address this at least for our community. I don't want to get into it now, but effectively, clearly, there was intentions for because all the dragged along rules are only applicable to legacy factions. So clearly they were at one point in time writing this universal special rule with the expectations that those legacy factions were going to be using this book. Obviously things changed. Hopefully in the future that will they'll get more of them, but that was different videos, different times for dragged along. And clearly I believe that once they stopped focusing on updating the legacy faction rules and started focusing on what was the core factions for release, they stopped iterating on this rule, which is why it feels a little bit half developed at this point and such. So again, a bunch of other communities, us included, have our versions of how to what we believe fix drag along or finish the iterating on it, so it makes it functional and works with the legacy units the way you'd expect them to. But again, that's in the legacy errata. So if you want to learn more about that, go check that video out.
So one of my favorite rules in the game is drilled. So what drilled lets you do is before any movement, you get to do a redress the ranks, which is where you can either add or remove five guys from your front rank.
Hmm.
So if you're a unit of cavalry and you're 5 wide and you have 2 ranks of knights, you can add the 5 in the back to the front and be 10 wide and then just charge all 10 in there all at once. That's great. But another thing that's great is to take those same unit and remove 3 guys from the front and be now 2 wide, and then just be a nice
Hmm.
little line of guys who can then do a marching column, then march all over the place because now you're in marching column. So either of those two are at your fingertips when you're a drilled unit, because before any movement you can do whatever you want, and including a
Hmm.
charge, and including a follow up. So if you're a unit of Graveguard and you paid 2 points per model for drilled, which I think is a bit much on them, then before you give ground, you can add or remove 5 guys from your front rank to then get wider and then back up 2 inches, which normally undead can't do. So
Hmm.
these are things that you can do. But my favorite thing to do with drilled is to either get wider or narrower on my overrun or pursuit moves to either avoid overrunning into somebody, or to go and clip a little unit where I'm like, bam, I'm gonna get into combat with you now because I'm drilled. I just add more guys, boom, there we go. Um, Drilled is insane. It's a very high skill ceiling rule to
It
have,
is.
but it is an incredibly good rule, and you will love having it when you have it. Another amazing ability of it is, oh, I really want to charge. I got a little bit of stuff in the way. Here, I'll just remove 1 guy, then I can get in there. It's great. Or
Yeah.
I got a unit of Swordmasters of Hoeth, and I'm like, oh, I get to make a charge. Fantastic! I'm gonna add as many guys as I can to the front rank, just have more attacks. This is awesome.
Yeah, if that's the position. And I think again the biggest thing with drilled at its core, it is high skill value. You will have to again get a lot of games under your belt and learn how to really maximize the use out of this. But again, for old world, as with most tabletop games, movement is king. Typically, you win and lose this game in the movement phase. Very true in old world, in particular because most units are less maneuverable and less speed than other tabletop games. Certainly, you are slower and less maneuverability than in 40K or AOS, things of that sort, right? Because it's an army-based regiment game. It's not a skirmish game. So drilled effectively gives you free movement, free positioning every time that unit's movement. So again, the more the units going across the battlefield, you are just getting more value all the time from that unit that you can do these things. And again, it's so easy. It's also one of the most forgiving rules because you get yourself, as Evan pointed out, multiple situations where a little bit more over here or a little less over there, and this allows you to flex on the fly when you aren't, that you didn't necessarily think 5 turns in advance. Or again, I want to maximize my frontage because in this unit they're vulnerable to attacks. Oh crap, something really big is over there. I want to rank up and get my rank bonuses, or I need to pursue something. So it is, and I do believe that it is one of the top 3 most powerful rules in the game right now. Certainly top 5, if not top 3. And it is really, really, really fun to use once you get good at it.
Yeah, if you don't have fly or skirmish, drilled is the next best thing.
It's great. Yeah.
Yeah, specific combos of that, you're basically just going to go into a tactics video. But basically, if you have drilled, you're going to be suddenly realizing all these situations. Drilled very commonly makes charges easier because you very commonly are charging something at an angle where if I made myself wider first, I'd have fewer inches to go before I hit them. Or I don't have to
Mhm.
wheel anymore because now I just go wide until I hit them and then I auto wheel instead of having to wheel before to get
Yep.
there. So drill often makes charging easier as well. But yeah, it's crazy.
Well, again,
Um,
and the most common entry level version for it is you start in marching column, so now you can move triple your movement instead of double. Which once you
yeah,
go triple, you're booking it across the board. And then you want to charge something the next turn or whatever. You can. This is the example where I'm in marching column. I could declare a charge. Typically, you can't do the charge because you're in marching column. But this is and they did clarify this in the FAQ. It was a big debate when the game first came out. But nope, you could start in marching column. You're drilled. So once you begin your move to or your charge move, you could move your reposition your unit to be not in marching column to be in a normal column where you can charge. Now all of a sudden you could charge. So super super powerful. Love drill.
all right. Another powerful one is Ethereal. So Ethereal, first of all, when you're Ethereal, you treat all terrain as open ground, so no dangerous terrain tests, no difficult ground slowing you down. You can charge through any kind of terrain you want, and you just ignore the penalties. You can't end inside Impassable, but you can charge through it. I recently had a temptation to use Ethereal to use Walk Between Worlds to reserve move my unit across the lava river when I was playing on that. Because I was just like, oh, I'm Ethereal. I can just walk across the lava. This is great.
Hmm.
But ethereal creatures, the other thing they can do is that they're not wounded by any attack that's not magical.
Hmm.
Now, that is insane because it's not a 2+ ward save. It's you are entirely immune to all damage. Doesn't matter how much there is. So,
Hmm.
one of the things that I love doing is taking any kind of unit of troops that I have in High Elves and making them ethereal with Walk Between Worlds, and then saying, all those fanatics you have, they don't hurt me at all. Does nothing.
Hmm. Super
It's
powerful.
great.
Now, very few units in the game start with Ethereal. Typically, the ones that do are undead. But again, the vampire counts, there's not that many of them. There are some, but a lot of the ones that do have it, the Green Knight is another example. Those units typically, even though if you don't have a magic weapon to kill them, typically units that start with this rule, you can destroy them through combat resolution. They will crumble and such. But again, if you have high magic, you can cast a spell that gives a unit ethereal. And guess what? They don't crumble because this is just all benefit. And again, while there are more magic items in this edition of Old World than there ever have been for basic core units than there ever were in previous editions, there's still plenty of units that don't have magic on their war machines, weapons, etc., so forth and so on. They're not all magical by default. So very, very powerful when used in the right circumstances,
Yeah.
powerful for movement, powerful for combat. Watch out if you're fighting some undead players in terms of, again, or the Green Knight. You need combat resolution to crumble them if you can't necessarily hurt them. So lots of things to consider. Very powerful rule. Doesn't come into play as often as you might think because it's just not that. Very few units have access to it.
It also makes you like so almost all impact hits and stomps are generally non-magical, so it can make you immune to
Hmm.
that. I've had times where I cast War Between Worlds on my unit of 20 White Lions where I'm facing off with 4 Beastman Chariots who are just sitting in front of me, and the other person's like, "Great, I can't charge you because they would do nothing. They would do no damage at all. So I'm just gonna sit here." And I was like,
Hmm.
"Great, sounds
Yep.
good to me." So
Yep.
yeah, it does feel great to use it. But mostly it's Green Knight and Vampire Counts who have this. Otherwise.
Yeah. Typically, wraiths, banshees, and green knights is where you're going to see it.
Evasive. Wow. Getting a lot of the really good rules out of the way at the beginning. So, evasive is
This is
amazing.
maybe the most annoying rule
Why is it annoying?
for the other person. Great if you're the person who has it. Not great if you don't have it.
So, evasive says once per turn, if you're declared the target of any kind of shooting attack in the shooting phase, you can use a fallback in good order to flee away from the shooting unit. And then after its move, you can resolve the shooting if they, first of all, can still see you, and if, second of all, you're actually still within range. Now, what's
Hmm.
incredibly cool about this is that you can fall back through your own units. And, like, for example, if you're a skirmisher, they don't even have to take a panic test. And then that unit you fell back through is now blocking the line of sight to them. So if you have a
Hmm.
ruby ring and you're like, ah ha ha, I'm going to shoot my ruby ring at Evan's Shadow Warriors. Well, guess what? They have
Hmm.
evasive. So if I'm sitting in my evasive Shadow Warriors 3 inches in front of my white lion wall, and I'm just like,
Hmm.
cool, you try to use the ruby ring on me, I fall back through the white lions, you can't see the Shadow Warriors anymore. Bob's your uncle. They don't get hit at all,
Yeah.
and the spell doesn't even
It,
go off. It just nothing happens.
almost every shooting attack in the game, not all of them, but almost all of them target the enemy unit, allowing you to use this. Whether it is someone shooting a bow and arrow, most war machines require you to target an enemy unit. Not all of them, most of them. Most spells target an enemy unit. There are some exceptions, like a vortex doesn't target an enemy unit. So pillar fire is a way to get around that because you're not targeting them. I think the cannon targets a point, not the enemy unit, but
Canon
mortars would
technically
target the
doesn't,
unit.
but it's kind of rude to talk about it that way. But yeah, it's kind of annoying.
But that's
I
how
could see I could
that's
see
how
an
it works.
argument for sure.
We're playing a tabletop game. There's an argument. Every player has an
Yeah.
argument for something. But again, super powerful rule. Almost everything in the game does target the unit. Magic, not magic, war machine range. So you can use this. If you're a skilled player, you can really use this to great effectiveness. In particular, getting out of the range. If you're just hovering at the range of the opposing unit's wizard or missile unit, and you can just boop to take a few steps back to get out of the range where they target you, very, very powerful.
So what I love to do is to have my wizard in my unit of Shadow Warriors where they have evasive, and I can end my turn within dispel range. So if they try to use Miasma Garage, Plague Rust, anything like that, I can dispel it. And then if they
Hmm.
try to cast a Magnet Missile on my wizard, I go, ahaha, and then I evasive, and I back up, and now even if I bump out of dispel range, it's kind of fine. It's mostly near the end of the phase. So we already got through the spells I'm most worried about, and now I just didn't get hurt by the shooting attack. So now what else are they going to do? That's probably the last thing they got. right?
Because those movement and hex spells and enhancement spells happen before the
Yeah.
shooting spells. So he's able to benefit from all the dispelling for the things he really wants to stop. And then once you get to the shooting phase, well, most of the magic is cast already. So peace out.
You know what's really fun is when you have this evasive chariot runner shadow war unit sitting in front of your chariots, where I can either fall back through the chariots, or if you don't shoot me, then I can just charge through that unit.
Yeah, it's really cool combo.
All right, so extra attacks is really obvious. It just gives you more attacks. Now, this special
It's
rule
good.
is very uncommon other than either weapons that say extra attack D3 or something like that.
Hmm.
Something like, the Berserker Blade gives you extra attack 1. There's
Hmm.
spells like Fury of Cain. It's the only thing it does is extra attack plus 1.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. I think
Things
the
like that.
difference here is again, this is where you need to be careful about frenzy and not stacking frenzy versus things that are extra attacks, which can stack, right?
Yeah.
So there are important nuances there. So again, just make sure you're reading: am I getting these extra attacks from a frenzy stacking because you can't stack frenzy, or is it just extra attacks? Because there's multiple ways and multiple armies to get extra attacks from multiple sources. Such as like I'm playing a Chaos Army. I have an extra arm, as a mutation or Chaos Gift. Or I got a gift of the Gaze of the Gods, or I got a magic weapon. Right? Suddenly, you have multiple sources that could give you multiple extra attacks, and they do stack. So extra attacks are great, especially because there's very few rules in this game. So very powerful.
Also, Frenzy gives you an extra attack, but only for a rider so not a mount. So if you cast a spell that gives Frenzy, for example, or if you have Frenzy from Mark of Corn, it doesn't give your dragon an extra attack. However, if you have a spell like Fury of Cain, that spell does
Hmm.
affect a mount. And so if I
Hmm.
cast Fury of Cain on my lion chariot, it gives 2 lions an extra attack and the 2 white lions on the back extra attacks for a total of 4 extra attacks for the whole thing.
Yep, which is super cool.
Or you
So
cast on the dragon
definitely,
guy, and the dragon now has 7 attacks.
yeah, but definitely, you're going to see again. That's one of the best examples on a chariot again, where you're going to see that affect multiple models on it, so you can really get a lot more value out of it. And in Evan's example there, well, the lion chariot is pulled by lion mounts, and those hit so much harder than a typical horse does. So he's really getting a lot more value out of those extra attacks.
Okay, fast cavalry is a rule that's pretty much just for if you're open order, you can march and still do a quick turn, which normally you can't do that. Um, I mean, I don't think this comes up super often. What I'll often do is I play a lot of my fast cav in open order, and then I'll just do, oh yeah, I guess I can do that, and I do a march, and then I do my 9-degree pivot, so I can march right up to the flank of a unit, and then just pivot so I can face what I want to face. Whoever,
Yeah,
almost
I
everyone
think it
else in the
doesn't.
universe plays them as skirmishers and just.
Yeah, and I think that's why this rarely comes into play. In previous editions, Fest Cavalry, for the most part, just meant it's a cavalry unit that skirmishes. There are nuances in this edition, but also at the same time, most mounted units that can be have Fest Cavalry also typically have the skirmish option as well. And for the most part, skirmish is so good in this edition that people will almost always just play them as skirmishers anywhere. Therefore, the benefits of fast cavalry just don't come into play that often. So again, I think perhaps they overtuned skirmishing a little bit in this edition, which is making fast cavalry feel very underutilized. I'm hoping we'll see some revisions, if not later in this edition, hopefully in the next edition, and we'll see fast cavalry become more of a meaningful thing in the future. But that's why it's there, and everyone's like, "Well, it's fast cavalry." It's like, "Well, he's just playing them as skirmisher." That's why you don't actually see the fast cavalry rules actually used almost ever.
Okay, so fear is a rule that's really easy to get wrong because, first of all, it barely ever happens.
People
Because,
get it wrong all the time.
so first of all, it's different than it used to be. Um, it used to be that if you outnumbered someone and you caused fear, it gave them -1 to their break check. That was really cool. That is now just a thing that terror does. Fear does not do that. But
Well,
the way it
no, in
works,
previous editions, if you caused fear and they didn't, and you beat them in combat, they would auto break.
oh yeah,
It
there's
was
that. Yeah.
crazy powerful in previous editions. They've really toned fear down in this edition, and quite frankly, it's a lot it feels a lot better because in the previous editions you would break from combat and get run down all the time so often, and it really was a feel bad moment. So they definitely toned fear down in this edition.
So first of all, the reason why it doesn't happen a lot is because you, in order to take any kind of fear test, you have to be the fear causing unit has to outnumber the other. For a good example of this is that every single goblin fears elves, but when will a goblin unit ever be a smaller unit than the elf unit it wants to charge or is fighting in combat? When is that ever going to happen, right?
Typically,
Barely
when it's
ever.
about to die.
Yeah, well, it or yeah, so then it wouldn't matter, right?
Exactly, because there's only a few goblins left, so it doesn't matter at that point because they're dead anyway. Yeah.
So the two things that happen are first of all, if you want to declare a charge against a fear-causing enemy that has more unit strength than you have to pass a leadership test, and if you fail it, you actually just can't charge, and you just sit there not doing anything.
Mhm.
Counts as a failed charge. I think. You still get to stand and shoot against that if they do that. Um, this did happen once where a
Mhm.
hobgoblin on a wolf was trying to charge my ogre tyrant on his big stonehorn, and he actually just failed his leadership 6 or 5 fear test and just couldn't charge
Oh
me.
no! Well, there was a scary ogre over there. Yeah.
So then, second of all, if you're actually engaged in combat with a fear and they still, and again, they have to have the higher unit strength, then they have to take a leadership test, and if they fail it, they get a -1 to hit against you. Now, this doesn't
Mhm.
happen if they pass the fear test to do the charge. It only happens if basically a fear causing unit charges you, or if you're still in combat the next turn around, or whatever. And so now, if you're outnumbered, you take that test and you have to take the -1. But this just doesn't happen very much because a lot of units that cause fear are like monsters and stuff like that are very small in unit strength compared to the things they're fighting against that don't ignore it. Because a lot of other things in the game, they either have fear, terror, or immune psychology. They don't even take these tests at all. So then you don't.
Yeah.
Again, you don't come up. Doesn't come
I
up.
think that's why we rarely see these because so many things in the game just ignore it because they're immune to psychology or they cause fear themselves, so they ignore it, or they cause terror, so they ignore it. And that's actually a large portion of the game. And or you have to outnumber them.
Yeah,
So just the terms and conditions means it doesn't come into play that often. And the biggest thing everyone forgets is they have to outnumber you.
yeah.
That's what everyone forgets, or have a higher unit strength. That's where everybody forgets.
The good thing though is that there is no way to re-roll this unless if you have veteran anymore. So if your BSB is nearby, your little night goblins can't re-roll their fear test if they fail it.
Nope.
So they just fail it, then they just can't hit the side of a barn, which is great.
Yeah, and that's something for again this edition, older edition, older editions. The BSB let you reroll pretty much any kind of leadership test in the game. You can't in this edition. This is one of the examples of nope. There is no reroll for this for the BSB. You have to have something like veteran that's or something that specifically says reroll any leadership test because the BSB does not let you do that.
No. All right, so last one before we wrap up this part one of this video. So we're talking about Feigned Flight. Now, this is a rule that I have recently come to absolutely love. Now, the reason why is because Feigned Flight lets you flee from a charge, but you automatically rally at the end, which has two
Mhm.
effects. First of all, if they still catch up to you, you don't get run down and murdered. That's effect number one. So you just go into
Mhm.
combat. You get to run away and still just go into combat. The second thing that happens is that you can use this when you have a wizard in a unit with Feigned Flight to flee from a charge, and then you are automatically rally, which means that when your next turn, you can still cast your enchantments and hexes. Because normally,
Mhm.
if you flee from a charge with a wizard, you have to rally after you would have already cast enchantments and hexes. So if you rally with your, let's say, illusion wizard, and after he fled, he then can't cast Miser Barrage that same turn. He's screwed, right? But if I have my illusion wizard in a Feigned Flight unit, I can flee from that charge when literally, let's say the dragon is charging at me. I flee from the charge. He charges after me and doesn't make it. And then I
Mhm.
auto rally, and on my turn I say, you know what? Miser Barrage you, buddy. And only a
Yeah,
Feigned Flight wizard can do that.
it's fantastic. And honestly, there's very few of those in the game.
There's like 4 units in the game that have this, and they're some of my favorites. So first of all, there's the Wood Elves have the Way Watchers. They've got it. And
Mhm.
the Warhawk Riders. They have Feigned Flight. Those are the 2 units, and both of them I think could be really good for a Wizard Bunker. I want to try that out. Shadow
Mhm.
Warriors have Feigned Flight, and then there's like the Goblin Wolf Riders. No,
Yeah, no, I
the
forget.
Hobgoblins. There's a couple Goblin units, and I think no, the Men at Arms ones they have Reserve Move, which most people much prefer Reserve Move for Wizards, but I think Feigned Flight can be just as good, especially on an Illusion Wizard because the ranges are so short. It lets you be a lot closer to the enemy because worst case scenario you get charged. Guess what? Run away, and no consequences. It's great. I think it's a really underrated rule. It's amazing. I love it.
It's super cool. Great rule. You just don't see it that often because not all units have it. All right, cool. Are we going to wrap up part 1 of this special rules here, Evan?
Yeah. All right. We'll come back on part 2.
All right, we'll see you all there. Bye.